You think 1950s dinners were just TV dinners and bland casseroles? Think again. Post-war American kitchens exploded with creativity, optimism, and recipes that turned homemakers into culinary heroes for their families. Let's dig into 60 easy American dinner recipes from the 1950s that time forgot. Creamed peas on buttered toast was one of those meals that whispered instead of shouted. It never tried to impress anyone. It was made for quiet nights, empty fridges, and long weeks. Grandma would melt a little butter in a pan, add canned peas, sometimes drained, sometimes not, and stir in milk and a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken it. Salt, pepper, maybe a dash of sugar if the peas were too sharp. Then she would ladle the warm, creamy mix over thick slices of buttered toast. It was soft, it was mild, it was the edible version of a warm blanket. Nobody bragged about it, and no one ever asked for seconds out loud. But the plate was always clean by the end. It was a meal that held your hand, quietly filled you up, and gave you the strength to keep going. In some homes, it was the only hot food all week, and even if you had fancier ingredients or a longer grocery list, you still came back to this because it made you feel like a kid again. Just peas and bread and thyme. That was more than enough. Boiled egg and sweet pickle sandwiches were the fast, quirky little dinner that came together in minutes when you needed to stretch groceries. You mashed up boiled eggs, mixed them with diced sweet pickles and mayonnaise, and spread the whole thing between slices of soft white bread. That was dinner. It sounds a little strange now, but it filled you up, stretched a carton of eggs, and cost next to nothing. These sandwiches showed up in old cookbooks from the 1940s through the 70s because they were practical, easy, and satisfying. The eggs added protein, the pickles gave sweetness and crunch, and the soft bread pulled it all together. You could eat it plain or toss in a little pepper if you wanted to dress it up, but most folks kept it simple. These were the dinners that filled plates fast, stretched budgets, and got families through tight times. Funny how the oddest little combinations stick with you long after the hard years pass. In many kitchens, the comforting aroma of a steamy bowl conjures memories of simpler evenings shared with loved ones. Instant tomato soup, a swift solution for hungry families, gained considerable momentum when processed foods took off in the early 20th century. Culinary historians point to its rising popularity as a prime example of how convenience foods dominated American pantries. Despite its rapid preparation time, the soup's smooth texture and mildly tangy flavor still deliver satisfying warmth that appeals to palates of all ages. Those who relish nostalgia might remember cozying up with a hot mug after a long day, while busy professionals champion its speed and convenience. Interestingly, tomatoes supply a generous helping of vitamin C, making this option more than just comfort in a cup. Some folks even joke that it's the Red Rescue, swooping in to save anyone from a dull dinner crisis. Simplicity and accessibility guide the entire process. Boil water, stir in tomato base, and add a dash of seasoning if desired. The result is a bowl of soothing familiarity that Americans often link with childhood memories. This timeless staple also leaves room for creative flair, whether swirling in a hint of cream or pairing it with crackers. When tomato sauce wasn't in the pantry and butter wasn't an option, a surprising combination stepped in: mayonnaise and mustard. Tossed with hot spaghetti noodles and seasoned with a dash of salt and pepper, this unusual pairing became a quick-fix meal known as mayo and mustard spaghetti, which was both budget-friendly and undeniably memorable. Spaghetti itself was one of the most affordable dry goods available, filling enough to feed a family without requiring much else. Mayonnaise, often stocked in refrigerators for sandwiches and salads, brought richness and a creamy texture, while mustard added just enough tang to keep things interesting. It wasn't gourmet, but it turned plain pasta into something that felt like a complete dish without the need for meat, cheese, or expensive sauces. In working-class households, meals like this weren't about following a recipe. They were about making do with what was available. Kids grew up eating it straight from the pot, a quick meal before heading outside to play or finishing homework at the kitchen table. It may not have been a dinner guests would rave about, but for those who remember it, the taste still lingers as a reminder of simpler times and just how far a few basic ingredients could go. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky, golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period, around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. Leftover turkey was once the foundation of creative home cooking. Long before frozen dinners and deli slices, resourceful cooks found ways to repurpose every part of a roasted bird. One of the most inventive solutions? A golden, bubbling gratin that transformed shredded turkey into something just as satisfying as the holiday feast itself. Sweet potatoes, naturally rich and slightly sweet, paired perfectly with the savory depth of turkey. Thinly sliced and layered, they acted as both a starch and a built-in flavor enhancer. A cheesy herbed cream sauce seeped into every bite, bringing a velvety richness that made this dish feel indulgent despite its humble origins. Some families added a pinch of nutmeg for warmth, while others topped it with breadcrumbs for a golden, crispy finish. For decades, this dish was a practical way to extend a meal and avoid food waste. Turkey was affordable, especially in the days when whole birds were purchased rather than prepackaged cuts. Sweet potatoes, widely available and inexpensive, provided both nutrition and flavor. As quick-fix meals and processed leftovers became the norm, dishes requiring careful layering and slow baking lost their appeal. For generations, lamb was a prized centerpiece of homecoming feasts and holiday gatherings. Its deep, rich flavor and fall-apart tenderness made it a dish reserved for special occasions, especially in families with European or Mediterranean roots. Salted fish and porridge is an example of an essential combination in medieval times. It was especially popular in coastal and northern regions. This is because preservation was a massive deal in those areas due to how they were always just dealing with rougher, colder climates. Also, it might be surprising, but fish was a religious pillar for people. The Catholic Church back then was the reigning religious authority, and it would impose all kinds of fast days, especially every Friday. See, here, any kind of meat was forbidden, except fish. The logic behind this is that the practice of fasting during Lent and on Fridays is to abstain from fleshly meat, but since fish are cold-blooded, they don't come into flesh meat. It's a technical exception. The porridge itself was something that would contrast very well with the fermented taste of the fish, and in some households, people were adding herbs, onions, and garlic as well. This was a dish that was always eaten out of necessity. The cheddar and tomato open-faced broil was the kind of dinner that always looked better than it had any right to. Grandma would take thick slices of sandwich bread, lay down a few rounds of fresh or canned tomato, and top it all with slabs of cheddar cheese. Then into the broiler it went, just long enough for the cheese to melt and bubble, with the edges crisping up like a grilled sandwich turned inside out. It was salty, juicy, and exactly what you needed when the pantry felt a little too empty. Some people added a shake of black pepper. Others spooned on a little mayonnaise before the cheese went on. It was flexible, forgiving, and always fast. You did not need a recipe, just a sense of timing and a hot oven. It fed kids after school. It filled up adults after work, and it made the house smell like someone was trying, even if it was just the toaster oven doing most of the work. That was Grandma's magic. She made 10-minute meals feel like home. Minute rice with canned chili and cheese was the dinner of champions. If your definition of champion was someone who worked 12 hours and still had to put food on the table. That old minute rice box was a lifeline back then, cooking up fluffy in just a few minutes. You dumped canned chili right over the top, shredded some cheddar if you had it, and dinner was done. Nobody expected it to be gourmet, but it filled you up, stuck to your ribs, and made sure you were ready for the next shift, the next chore, the next whatever life threw at you. The cookbooks from those days leaned hard on pantry meals like this because they worked. They were honest. Quick dinners that kept you standing, even when life tried to knock you down. And hey, melted cheese makes everything better. 1950s buffet tables epitomizes the synergy between quick assembly and gratifying flavors. Historically, tuna skyrocketed in popularity after World War II when canned fish became a dependable staple in countless American households. The dish's appeal lies not only in its minimal ingredient list, but also in the crisp, refreshing texture that contrasts vibrantly with the creamy filling. Experts have often praised tuna's generous protein and essential nutrients, while home cooks appreciate the ability to whip up a family-friendly lunch with minimal fuss. Some quip that it's one of the few items that can hide wilted lettuce's questionable state, although a freshly washed bed of lettuce is always recommended. Indeed, the concept of presenting individual servings in lettuce cups dates back to an era enamored with elegant simplicity, an era that prized wholesome comfort over showy extravagance. By capitalizing on the combination of mayonnaise, crunchy celery, and subtle spices, this preparation delivers a taste that feels both nostalgic and contemporary. Eggs and milk, two of the most basic ingredients in any 1960s kitchen, were the foundation of a meal that felt more like a science experiment than dinner. Floating island dinner, as it was sometimes called, involved poaching eggs in a thin milk broth, then serving them over toast with a dusting of paprika. It was cheap, it was filling, and while it may have looked unusual, it made the most of what families had on hand. Eggs were a working-class staple, packed with protein and relatively inexpensive compared to meat. Poaching them in milk was a way to add richness without using butter or oil, and the broth itself didn't go to waste. It soaked into the toast, creating a soft, custard-like texture that was surprisingly satisfying. Paprika wasn't just for color. It added a hint of warmth and spice to an otherwise mild dish. This kind of meal had roots in old-fashioned frugality. Similar recipes had been around for generations, passed down from an era when every ingredient had to serve a purpose. For kids, it was a bit of a mystery. Why was dinner floating? But for parents, it was an easy, one-pan solution that turned a few simple staples into something warm and nourishing at the end of a long day. Hear me out, this one might sound a little boring at first glance, but trust me, it's a classic for a reason. The split pea soup is a hearty, filling, and surprisingly healthy-ish, thick, creamy soup packed with vibrant green split peas and other vegetables like carrots, celery, and onions. Now, on that healthy-ish claim, it depends on how much butter and cream your grandma used. The split pea soup is the kind of soup that leaves you feeling satisfied for hours. It has been a St. Patrick's Day staple ever since its origin in 1905. The best part? You can totally customize it according to your liking. Yeah, don't be shy to throw in your favorite veggies, add a splash of lemon juice for a bit of brightness, or even some leftover shredded chicken for an extra protein punch. We really need to bring this one back. Once a staple of working-class kitchens, this hearty one-dish meal was built on the kind of ingredients that stretched a family's budget without sacrificing flavor. Cabbage, potatoes, and smoked sausage, three of the most economical and widely available foods, came together in layers, baked slowly in a rich mustard cream sauce. The result was a rustic, deeply satisfying dish that filled bellies and kept families warm through colder months. Cabbage was a practical ingredient, valued for its long shelf life and versatility. When paired with smoky seasoned sausage and starchy potatoes, it created a meal that was both inexpensive and packed with flavor. The mustard-infused cream sauce added a tangy richness, tying everything together. Some home cooks added a dash of vinegar for brightness, while others incorporated cheese for extra indulgence. No matter the variation, this dish was proof that humble ingredients could create something truly special. Why did it fall out of favor? The rise of prepackaged meals and low-carb trends made cabbage-heavy dishes less common, and as quick stovetop meals replaced slow-baked casseroles, this once popular dish faded from view. Baked turnips with herbs is an example of how even a simple and humble root vegetable can be turned into something that gets your kids at the table if you know what you're doing. Luckily, medieval-era cooks had a lot of room for trial and error, and they definitely learned a few things about working with turnips. While baking them was never as common as stewing or boiling them, it was extremely good. Households that had the privilege of a bake oven would abuse that luxury maliciously, in fact. That's just how nice it was. In households where that wasn't a thing, Tay turnips were typically wrapped in kale or cabbage leaves and then baked in ashes or at the edges of a hearth. This was a pretty rustic method, but it would help to soften the turnip, and it let the herbs introduce some much-needed flavor. Of course, you had to be very careful that what you were doing wasn't going to burn the turnips. Monasteries were most commonly known for preparing turnips, and they relied pretty much entirely on olive oil and butter. This resulting dish was something that was really earthy and savory, but the herbs helped when it came to the taste of turnips. For some, that taste can be really overwhelming. Break time. 1 second. Die. Cold dinners had a way of sneaking into the rotation, especially during sticky summers or long days when even boiling water felt like a chore. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were Grandma's way of keeping things simple but still making it look like she tried. She would scoop a big spoonful of cottage cheese onto a plate, nestle a golden peach half beside it, and top the whole thing with a maraschino cherry if she was feeling fancy. Some people used lettuce as a bed. Others just reached for a fork and got to work. It was creamy, sweet, and oddly refreshing, the kind of combination you only appreciate once you grow up and remember it out of nowhere. The peaches added just enough syrupy sunshine, and the cottage cheese made sure you did not go to bed hungry. It was also what she served when she wanted to eat light but still feed the whole house. This was not a dinner that tried to win over picky eaters. It was a dinner that said, "This is what we have, and it will do just fine." And somehow, it did. Not every meal needed heat or noise. Some just needed quiet. Spam and egg scramble was one of those 10-minute dinners that showed up again and again when times got lean. You diced up a can of Spam, fried it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and crisped, then scrambled in a few eggs with onions if they were around. It all came together fast, filled your plate, and made sure nobody went to bed hungry. Spam was a pantry staple for a reason. Cheap, shelf-stable, and surprisingly versatile. The old cookbooks were full of ways to stretch it into something that felt like a real meal. Toss in eggs, and suddenly, dinner looked good enough to serve without apology. It was salty, hearty, and loaded with that familiar taste of making do with what you had. Families leaned on quick meals like this because they worked. 10 minutes on the stove, a hot plate in front of everyone, and dinner was done. No one claimed it was fancy, but when your pantry was empty and the paycheck still days away, it tasted like a small victory. Funny how those simple, practical meals stuck with us. They filled the gaps and filled us up. Though overshadowed by modern fast foods, quick chopped liver on rye endures as a testament to adaptability and rich culinary heritage. Historically, chopped liver found its niche in Eastern European Jewish homes, where families prized its affordability and robust nutritional profile. Even during times of scarcity, the recipe thrived, packing intense flavors into a straightforward package. With a ready-made liver spread slathered on dense rye, preparation becomes a breeze, sparing busy households from lengthy cooking sessions. Its smooth texture and savory notes contrast beautifully with the bread's satisfying crunch, lending each bite a subtle complexity that defies its simple construction. Many who sample this old favorite joke that it's a dish only a mother could love, but the punchline is in its enduring popularity across generations. Nutritional experts have long noted that organ meats supply essential vitamins, underscoring their practical value when shopping on a budget. By combining time-honored tradition with modern convenience, this dish proves that hearty meals needn't be complicated. In working-class kitchens, the best meals weren't always planned. They were thrown together with whatever was available. A pound of ground beef, a can of tomatoes, some diced potatoes, and a handful of elbow macaroni could turn into a thick, hearty stew that stuck to your ribs and stretched across multiple meals. Some called it slumgullion, others just called it dinner. Dishes like this had no strict recipe, just a basic formula, cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable. One night it might be heavy on potatoes. The next, macaroni took center stage. Some families added onions for flavor, while others bulked it up with beans or whatever vegetables were left in the fridge. The name slumgullion had been around since the 1800s, used by miners and sailors to describe a hodgepodge meal, proof that resourceful cooking had always been part of survival. Ground beef was one of the most affordable proteins in the 1960s, and canned tomatoes provided flavor without the cost of fresh produce. With a simple pot and a little seasoning, this one-dish meal fed entire families with ease. It was the kind of food that tasted even better the next day, reheated on the stove after a long shift or a day at school. Comfort food without the price tag. Don't you love low-effort foods where you can just throw in the ingredients and let your slow cooker do all the work? Well, you would have loved festive slow-cooked beef tips. As the name suggests, this one was a favorite at festive dinner parties and people couldn't stop raving about it. It's very simple too. Tender beef tips simmered low and slow in a savory sauce brimming with flavor. You can customize the sauce to your liking. Add some red wine for a touch of sophistication, or maybe ranch if you aren't feeling fancy. No judgment here. Festive slow-cooked beef tips are perfect for a busy weeknight or a casual weekend gathering. Just pop it in the slow cooker before you head out the door and come home to a delicious meal waiting for you. There was a time when Sunday dinner wasn't complete without a plate of slow-cooked, gravy-drenched pork chops. Smothered in rich, savory onion gravy and served alongside a heaping portion of mashed potatoes, this dish was a cornerstone of Southern home cooking. It was an experience, one that filled the kitchen with the unmistakable aroma of comfort. Pork was an affordable alternative to beef, making it a practical choice for families looking to stretch their grocery budget. Bone-in chops were particularly popular, as they were both flavorful and inexpensive. The slow cooking process allowed even the toughest cuts to become fork tender, absorbing the deep, savory notes of the seasoned gravy. Some cooks swore by a cast-iron skillet, while others let the dish simmer in a slow cooker for hours, ensuring the pork melted in your mouth. But as convenience foods and boneless, skinless meats took over the supermarket, this dish began to disappear. Quick-fix dinners replaced slow-simmered meals, and thick homemade gravies gave way to powdered mixes and canned alternatives. Today, smothered pork chops are a rare sight at the dinner table. But for those who remember the first bite of a perfectly tender chop covered in rich, peppery gravy, it's a dish worth revisiting. Barley bread is one of the oldest kinds of loaded breads that you can find in European history. It's completely medieval and has a history that goes back thousands of years. This is because among all the grains in the world, barley is arguably one of the first that we ever domesticated. It was first cultivated in the Fertile Crescent, which, if you don't know where that is, it's the area that covers modern-day Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. Barley bread was one of the most common kinds of bread in the early Middle Ages, and it went onwards towards the High Middle Ages as well. This was typically considered to be a peasant bread, though. It had a coarse texture, it was darker than other breads, and it did not really have enough gluten. It was hard bread because of that fact. It was actually a bit of a sign of your economic class if you were constantly having barley bread, because only the rich people would get to eat fluffy white loaves of bread like we're used to. Ham and applesauce might sound fancy today, but back in the day, it was just something Grandma could throw together before the table was even set. Sliced ham went straight into a hot skillet, sometimes with just a dab of butter or the leftover fat from breakfast. A quick sear on each side was all it needed. Meanwhile, the applesauce, homemade if you had a backyard tree, canned if you were in a hurry, was warming on the back burner. This was dinner you could smell from the front porch. The saltiness of the ham played off the soft, tart sweetness of the apples in a way that felt balanced, simple, and oddly comforting. It was a meal for days when you were tired, when groceries were thin, or when you just needed something that felt familiar. And the best part? No oven. No long wait. Just a skillet, a spoon, and a little heat. Folks might not talk about ham and applesauce as a main course anymore, but for a generation raised on wartime thrift and flavor that did not waste time, this was a weeknight miracle. If you ever needed proof that sweet and salty go hand in hand, here it is. quick potato flake pancakes were one of those practical budget dinners born from the back of old pantry shelves. You grabbed a box of instant potato flakes, mixed them with water and a little egg if you had it, then shaped the dough into small pancakes and fried them up in butter. That was dinner. It came together in 10 minutes flat and filled you up with simple, salty, crispy goodness. These pancakes were a staple of old cookbooks that loved pantry meals you could make fast with whatever was on hand. No peeling, no mashing, no waiting for potatoes to boil, just flakes, water, and a hot skillet. You could add herbs or cheese to dress them up, but most families kept it simple. They were crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, and filled your plate without much effort. This was dinner that made the best of tight grocery budgets and busy nights. Funny how something as humble as potato flakes could feel like a proper meal when you needed it most. Long before fancy nut butters dominated grocery aisles, a beloved combination of peanut butter and bananas reigned supreme in many American homes. Referred to fondly by some as the old-time peanut butter and banana sandwich, it gained traction in the mid-20th century as an affordable yet satisfying pick-me-up. Historians note that peanut butter became widely popularized in the United States in the early 1900s, while bananas, thanks to expanding imports, evolved into a household staple. This distinctive pairing offers both creamy consistency and a soft, subtly sweet bite that fuses into a delightfully nostalgic treat, promising convenience for busy families needing a quick snack. Some enthusiasts joke that the only challenging part is deciding whether to toast the bread, but the crucial element is the dreamy melding of textures. Accessibility, highlighted by easily sourced ingredients, underscores why the sandwich remains iconic despite changing food trends. It also provides a modest dose of potassium from bananas and protein from peanut butter, underscoring its practicality. There was a time when dinner didn't come from a drive-thru or a frozen box. It came from whatever was on hand. In kitchens where budgets were tight and grocery trips were limited, a humble combination of eggs, milk, flour, and butter could transform into something that filled bellies without emptying wallets. So how was egg sauce on saltines made? Hard-boiled eggs were mashed into a simple white sauce, thickened just enough to spoon over a stack of saltine crackers. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Eggs were a working-class staple, packed with protein and cheap enough to buy by the dozen. A basic white sauce, made from milk, flour, and butter, was the foundation of countless Depression-era and post-war meals, stretching ingredients without overpowering them. Crackers? Those were always in the pantry, whether for soup, snacks, or in this case, an entire meal. Families who couldn't afford fresh bread every day turned to saltines as a substitute, their crisp texture adding just enough bite to an otherwise soft dish. It may not have been the most exciting dinner, but it was warm, filling, and familiar. Kids ate it without fuss. Parents appreciated how far it stretched, and for those who grew up on it, the taste is forever linked to simpler times. Now, Swiss steak is like a warm hug from the past. This dish is all about slow-cooked, fall-apart tender beef bathed in a tangy tomato sauce. Think slow cooker vibes, but way before slow cookers were even a thing. Now, the Swiss steak is all about patience. The longer you simmer the beef, the more melt-in-your-mouth delicious it becomes. It's also the perfect way to use up that tougher cut of meat you accidentally grabbed at the store. If you grew up thinking this dish was from Switzerland, as the name suggests, now would be a good time for me to tell you your whole life was a lie. This technique of cooking up tender meat came from England, so they're the ones to thank for this meaty goodness. Slow roasting a lamb shoulder with garlic and fresh herbs was a time-honored tradition. Lamb was once far more common on American dinner tables than it is today. In the early 20th century, it was an affordable alternative to beef and pork, particularly in rural areas where small-scale farming was the norm. Shoulder cuts were especially budget-friendly, benefiting from long, slow cooking to break down tough fibers. Roasted low and slow with rosemary, thyme, and whole cloves of garlic, the meat absorbed deep, aromatic flavors while becoming melt-in-your-mouth tender. So why did it disappear from everyday meals? As industrial farming shifted American preferences toward beef and chicken, lamb fell out of favor. It became harder to find in grocery stores, and for many home cooks, its distinctive flavor was an acquired taste. Faster, more convenient proteins replaced slow-cooked roasts, and over time, this once popular dish faded into obscurity. Apple and nut porridge was a delightful, nutritious dish that would be somewhere in between everyday food and a celebratory treat. Now see, porridge was something that had a lot of colorful variations in the medieval world. Typically, it would be made with oats and millet, but if that wasn't available, then people could also just use different kinds of grains like rye or barley. During harvest season is when the party would really get going, though. That's when people would have abundant access to fruits and nuts, and that's when porridge could be turned into something significantly more special than what they were used to. Wild and homegrown apples were incredibly reliable. They would thrive in pretty much most major European countries. Apple orchards were something that would be seen in most village commons and monasteries too. Apples would be chopped, sliced, and simmered until they were just a little bit sweet, and nuts would be crushed and stirred into the porridge. This was a great breakfast, but if you had honey, some warm spices, and a bit of cream, it was something fit for a feast. Peanut butter and bacon sounds like a dare today, but to Grandma, it was just Tuesday lunch. This was a sandwich born in the tail end of the Great Depression and carried proudly into the next decade by people who knew how to stretch every ingredient. She would fry up strips of bacon until they crackled, drain them on the same paper towel she used all week, then lay them across a thick spread of peanut butter on white sandwich bread. That was it. No lettuce, no tomato, no fancy mayonnaise. Just salt, fat, protein, and speed. Kids loved the crunch. Grown-ups loved how it filled you up without burning through the grocery budget. And for something so strange-sounding, it just worked. The warmth of the bacon softened the peanut butter slightly, and the two came together like old friends who had nothing in common but always got along. Sometimes she would add a second slice of bread, but often it was open-faced and served cold. It was portable, practical, and surprisingly satisfying. And in homes where time was short and mouths were many, that counted for everything. You might laugh at it now, but one bite would probably bring it all back. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was one of those meals that showed up when time was short and the cupboards looked bare. You sliced up those hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and let them simmer in a can of creamed corn until everything bubbled together. It sounds a little ridiculous now, but back then, it was comfort food at its most practical. This was not a recipe out of some fancy magazine. It came straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that every kitchen drawer seemed to have. Families on tight budgets loved it because it made use of pantry staples, and somehow, that sweet corn and salty hot dog combination worked. You could dress it up with black pepper or a little hot sauce, but most folks kept it plain. After a long day, this dinner showed up in 10 minutes flat, filling your belly even if your wallet felt empty. Funny how those quick meals stick with you long after the hard times pass. In countless family kitchens, speedy rice pilaf stands as a testament to how resourcefulness can satisfy palates in minutes. Historically, pilaf traces back centuries to Middle Eastern and Central Asian cuisines, though it found renewed popularity across the United States as packaged convenience foods gained momentum in the 20th century. Some comedic observers say it's a dish that never retires, showcasing staying power in households across the country. At its core, this recipe relies on briefly sautéing onions in a dash of oil, then combining quick-cooking rice with flavorful spices, ensuring a well-rounded taste without prolonged stovetop watch. The resulting texture is fluffy yet distinct, offering a balance of softness and gentle bite that appeals to all ages. Nostalgia emerges when recalling mid-century TV commercials that championed instant rice, promising a perfect side dish ready faster than a station break. Today, home cooks still appreciate its no-fuss approach, which requires only basic ingredients and minimal monitoring. The convenience resonates with those juggling busy schedules, who often joke that any dish requiring more than 10 minutes conflicts with precious downtime. When dinner had to come together fast and money was tight, there was one golden rule: nothing went to waste. Leftover potatoes, stray bits of meat, a spoonful of peas from last night's dinner, it all had a place in the baking dish. Held together with a can of condensed soup or a ladle of thick gravy, garbage plate casserole was less about following a recipe and more about cleaning out the fridge. Working-class families in the 1960s didn't have the luxury of throwing away food, and casseroles like this turned scraps into something filling. Canned soups, especially cream of mushroom or cream of chicken, were kitchen workhorses, stretching ingredients while adding richness. Crackers or breadcrumbs on top gave it that familiar golden crust, making it feel like a meal rather than a collection of leftovers. It was never the same dish twice, but that was part of its charm. One night it might taste like last Sunday's roast beef. The next, it had the essence of yesterday's pork chops. No one knew exactly what they were going to get, but that didn't matter. It was warm, it was filling, and most importantly, it was a reminder that a little creativity could turn scraps into supper. The Hungarians really killed it with dinners that shaped our childhood, because we've got another banger on the list. Hungarian goulash was everyone's favorite cozy, hearty meal back in the day. Goulash is a hearty stew whipped up with tender chunks of beef simmered in a rich, savory sauce brimming with paprika. Yeah, paprika was huge back in the day. So why did this delicious dinner vanish from our dinner tables? Well, the Hungarian goulash traces back as far as the 10th century to stews eaten by the shepherds, so you can say this one might just have run its course. But hey, if you're ever craving goulash, dust off some old cookbooks and get to work, because it really isn't hard to wump up. This is the perfect dish for a chilly night in, curled up on the couch with a good movie. Just be careful not to spill it on your mom's vintage tablecloth. Those things are irreplaceable. Slow cooking was once a necessity, not a luxury. Before pressure cookers and pre-packaged meals, tougher cuts of beef were transformed through hours of gentle simmering, unlocking deep, rich flavors. This smoky chipotle beef ragu was one such dish, a meal that took time but rewarded patience with melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. Chipotle peppers, known for their earthy heat, were a staple in traditional Mexican and Southwestern cooking, but by the mid-20th century, their smoky kick found its way into American kitchens. Paired with tomatoes, garlic, and slow-braised beef, this dish delivered a bold, layered flavor that stood apart from ordinary pot roasts. Served over creamy polenta or even buttered noodles, it was both comforting and deeply satisfying. Despite its rich taste, this meal was surprisingly budget-friendly. Beef chuck or brisket, once some of the most affordable cuts, became tender and flavorful when cooked low and slow. The sauce was built from pantry staples, making it an easy, accessible choice for home cooks. But over time, as quick weeknight meals took priority and polenta lost ground to pasta and rice, this dish faded from dinner tables. Today, Chipotle has seen a resurgence in trendy restaurants, but this home-style beef ragu remains a forgotten classic. Black bread and ripping is one of those dishes that may not have any specific, notable history with it, but one that says something about the people that make it. First, let's start with what black bread is. It was the everyday bread of the citizens and rural folk of Northern and Eastern Europe. From Russia to Scandinavia and Poland, black bread, this distinctly dark, coarse bread made out of rye, bran, and maslin, was an incredibly hard bread. It would stale quickly, and back then, they didn't even have that many preservatives. Still, it was one of the few kinds of sustainable breads people could make with the grains they had. So what were they to do? People were going to adapt, that's what. And adapt they did. This is where dripping comes in. It's just lard, by the way, but it would transform the texture of the bread. What was just a hard and rough loaf of bread would suddenly soften, become warmer, and become a lot better to bite into. The crispy brown pits in the roast pan would have been mixed in, and they really added to the vibe of the dish a lot more. The dripping flavor would also be different depending on what kind of animal people would use, and pork dripping was the most common one. So, there you have black bread and dripping, a dish that reminds you of how people will find any way to get by. This one came straight out of the open the pantry and hope for a miracle school of cooking. Scrambled eggs with canned chili was never in any cookbook, but it made it onto plates across America faster than most 5-ingredient dinners. Grandma would beat a few eggs with whatever milk she had left, toss them in a skillet, and stir them just until they were barely set. Then came the chili, straight from the can, full of beans and spice and a little bit of mystery meat. It would warm right on top of the eggs until the kitchen smelled like a diner on a slow afternoon. A few slices of toast on the side, maybe a wedge of cheese if you were lucky, and you had yourself a meal. It was hearty, messy, and completely satisfying. No one asked what brand the chili was or whether the eggs were farm fresh. What mattered was that it was hot, filling, and on the table in 10 minutes. It was meals like this that made it possible to get through the rest of the week. And once you have eaten it once, you will understand why it never needed a recipe. Quick tomato egg drop soup was a fast, practical dinner that showed up in old cookbooks for families juggling tight grocery budgets and tighter schedules. You started with hot broth, usually whatever bouillon cube or soup base you had in the cupboard. Then you poured in canned tomatoes and stirred everything together until it simmered. The final touch was whisked eggs, slowly dripped in as you stirred, turning into silky ribbons in the hot broth. It looked a little fancier than it was, but this meal was all about speed and making the best of what you had. The tomatoes added sweetness, the broth made it filling, and the eggs gave enough protein to keep everyone going. It came together in less than 10 minutes and cost next to nothing, which is exactly why old cookbooks loved it. It was warm, fast, and comforting without much effort. Families leaned on meals like this because they filled bellies and stretched paychecks at the same time. Funny how those quick little soup tricks turned into classics that still stick with people. In times of hectic schedules, a savory bowl of noodles can feel like an instant remedy for dinner-time stress. With 10-minute stir-fried noodles, there is minimal chopping, easy cleanup, and undeniable flavor. Speed is paramount here. People balancing work and family can still enjoy a hearty meal. Historically, noodles have held a revered place in Asian cuisine, with archaeologists finding the earliest examples in China over 4,000 years ago. This updated recipe calls for quick-cooked noodles, fresh vegetables, and a splash of soy sauce, culminating in a meal both satisfying and straightforward. Some home cooks joke that stir-frying is the official sport of last-minute dinners, praising its capacity to salvage any leftover produce. Texture remains a hallmark, combining crisp, tender vegetables with pleasantly chewy noodles. Nostalgia factors in as many recall the era when simple stir-fries gained traction in American kitchens during the 1970s. Meanwhile, accessibility stands out since few specialized ingredients are required and the entire process relies on a single pan. Not every seafood dish came from the ocean. Some came straight from a can. In a time when fresh shrimp was a luxury for coastal towns, canned shrimp offered an affordable way for working-class families to bring a little seafood into their diets. Mixed with peas and a thick, creamy white sauce and served over crackers or toast, this dish had a playful name, Shrimp Wiggle. But it was all business when it came to stretching ingredients. Canned shrimp had been around since the early 20th century, marketed as a convenient alternative to fresh shellfish. By the 1960s, it found its way into all kinds of home-cooked meals, from salads to casseroles. In this dish, it was combined with a simple white sauce, a budget-friendly staple made from butter, flour, and milk that turned just about anything into a filling, stick-to-your-ribs meal. The peas added a pop of color and a bit of sweetness, balancing out the richness of the sauce. Served over saltines or toasted white bread, it wasn't fancy, but it was warm, comforting, and familiar. For many kids, it was their first introduction to seafood, whether they liked it or not. Some remember it fondly, while others never quite warmed up to the idea of shrimp that came from a can. Scalloped chicken casserole. Here's another classic casserole that deserves a comeback. This dish is the perfect example of simple but mouth-watering good. I mean, just imagine tender chicken pieces in a creamy sauce, seasoned to perfection, and layered with fluffy breadcrumbs. I think I'm feeling hungry now. Scalloped chicken casserole is a great way to use up leftover chicken, and it's perfect for a quick and easy weeknight meal. Not to mention, it's a dish that's sure to please even the pickiest eaters. Who can resist creamy chicken and crispy breadcrumbs? Ditch your takeout menus for a night and take a trip down memory lane by giving this casserole a try. You can find dozens of recipes on the internet, and it won't take you hours to whip up. Trust me, your taste buds will thank you. Bright, tangy, and effortlessly elegant lemon chicken piccata was once a dinner table favorite. With its delicate balance of citrus, butter, and briny capers, this dish turned simple ingredients into something refined. Italian-American families popularized it in mid-century kitchens, and by the 1960s, it had become a go-to recipe for home cooks looking to add a touch of sophistication to a weeknight meal. Chicken was an economical protein, but before boneless, skinless cuts were widely available, whole birds had to be broken down by hand. Piccata was traditionally made with thinly pounded chicken breasts, quickly dredged in flour and sautéed until golden. The sauce was the star, fresh lemon juice and capers combined with a silky butter reduction to create a dish that was light yet deeply flavorful. It was often served with pasta or rice, making it both practical and satisfying. So why did this dish vanish from home kitchens? Over time, complex flavors gave way to simpler, more standardized meals. The rise of processed sauces and pre-made chicken dishes made from scratch piccata seemed like more effort than it was worth. If you've ever had split pea soup or peas pudding, then you might be interested to know that it actually originated from peas porridge. It was a dish that was really high in calories, but it was also really filled with protein. This was even better for people growing up because back in the medieval times, if you did not happen to live near any huntable game or were not rich, you could simply forget about having any kind of meat. The taste of this was still okay enough without it, but it was better when there were bits here and there. It's actually something that most people thought was really comforting, and it was why people invested in growing peas. Peas were convenient because even cottagers and small-time families could start to grow them. When famines would hit, peas were one of the kinds of legumes that could grow even when other grains simply could not. Break time. 1 second. There were two things nearly every kitchen had back then: creamed corn and hot dogs. When both of them landed in the same skillet, dinner was practically done. This was the kind of meal Grandma made when time was short and kids were restless. She would slice the hot dogs into little coins and toss them into a buttered pan until they browned just right around the edges. Then came the creamed corn, thick, sweet, and silky from the can. It all got mixed together into a bubbling, golden mess that looked questionable to some but tasted like warm security. You could eat it on its own, spoon it over bread, or mop it up with the last slice of toast from breakfast. Nobody called it gourmet, but everyone called it dinner. It filled your belly, cleaned out the pantry, and gave you one less thing to worry about. And somehow, it was the meal that lingered in memory more than any roast or fancy casserole. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was how fast it came together. Or maybe it was just that it tasted better when you were young, hungry, and too impatient to wait for something fancier. Corned beef hash from the can was one of those pantry miracles that turned a tin of meat and potatoes into a hot, filling dinner without much fuss. You sliced open the can, dumped the hash into a hot skillet, and let it crisp up around the edges until it was golden and ready to eat. You could fry an egg on top if you had one, but even plain, it did the job. This meal came straight from those old cookbooks that knew exactly how to stretch groceries and fill a plate fast. Corned beef hash was salty, hearty, and packed enough flavor to make up for how simple it was. It fed families during tight times, filled lunchboxes, and showed up on the table when there was not much else to work with. It might not have been fancy, but it was practical. And back then, practical meals were king. These dinners got everyone fed in under 10 minutes, with nothing wasted and no one left hungry. Funny how even canned food like this turned into something that stuck around in people's memories. Sardines on crackers with onion and mustard was never anyone's idea of a celebration, but it sure was dinner. On the nights when nothing was thawed, the stove stayed cold, and Grandma was too tired to fuss. this is what came out. The sardines came straight from the tin, laid out on saltines or toast rounds. A sliver of raw onion went on top, followed by a little mustard, just enough to punch it up. It was salty, it was sharp, and it was surprisingly satisfying. You could eat 3 or 4 and call it a night, or serve them with a boiled egg and call it fancy. They were high in protein, low in cost, and required zero prep. Lent, lean budgets, or hot summers, this was a go-to. Kids turned up their noses. Adults cleaned their plates. It was not glamorous, but it worked. And in homes where nothing went to waste and every bite counted, that was enough. You might not crave it now, but if you grew up with it, you never really forgot. Cold beans and onion salad was a no-cook dinner pulled straight from the cupboard that showed up again and again during lean times. You opened a can of kidney beans, drained them, and tossed them with sliced onion, vinegar, salt, and pepper. That was dinner. It might not sound like much now, but when the summer heat made turning on the stove unbearable, it was a lifesaver. These little bean salads filled old cookbooks from the 1930s to the 70s because they were quick, cheap, and practical. The vinegar gave it tang, the onions added bite, and the beans packed enough protein to get you through the night. You served it cold, right from the fridge, and ate it with a fork straight from the bowl. It was filling, salty, and satisfying when groceries ran low and energy ran even lower. Families leaned on meals like this because they worked. They filled you up fast, cost next to nothing, and kept the kitchen cool. Funny how the simplest pantry meals stick around longest. Bologna wasn't just for sandwiches. When money was tight and meat had to be stretched, it found its way into all kinds of meals, including breakfast, where it was ground up, fried, and turned into a creamy, savory gravy. Poured over biscuits or a few slices of white bread, ground bologna gravy took one of the cheapest meats on the market and transformed it into something warm, filling, and satisfying. Bologna had long been a go-to protein for working-class families. Made from a mix of leftover meat trimmings, it was significantly cheaper than fresh cuts of beef or pork, but still packed enough flavor to carry a dish. Frying it first gave it a crispy, caramelized edge, while the addition of milk and flour turned it into a rich, hearty gravy. Served over whatever bread was available, it became a meal that could keep a family going through the day. For those who grew up eating it, the smell of sizzling bologna in a cast-iron skillet brings back memories of weekend breakfasts and weekday suppers alike. It wasn't fancy, but that wasn't the point. It was resourcefulness at its best, a way to take something simple and turn it into comfort food with just a few basic ingredients and a little time at the stove. Hard cheese and bread is one of the oldest and most memorable pairings from the medieval period, and bread and cheese were some of the most core meals for people back then. It wasn't even a specific group of people, it was almost everyone. Monks, shepherds, travelers, nomads, farmers, fishermen, peasants, and even citizens. Bread would be made using whatever kind of grains were possibly available, and they were the typical ones we have gone over so far. If you were rich, you would just be eating wheat, and that was always a dead giveaway that you were rich too. The class disparity back then was pretty black and white. In the middle and lower classes, as they existed back then, you would get to see several different kinds of breads, like dark and rough ones, or fluffy but dense ones. Hard cheese was something that was favored over other kinds of dairies because it could be stored for a very long period without spoiling anything. Cheesemaking was something that was an extremely rural activity, and it was practiced in all kinds of homes, monasteries, and farms. Milk from sheep would be curdled via rennet and pressed, then salted and aged to make firm cheese. It was a practice that would go on throughout France, Switzerland, and even England. Scrapple was traditionally a way to use up leftover pork scraps, but when meat was scarce or too expensive, another version took its place, one that relied on sweet potatoes and cornmeal instead. Sweet potato scrapple kept the same fried, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside texture, but swapped out meat for mashed sweet potatoes, mixed with cornmeal and spices, then molded into a loaf and sliced before frying. It was simple, cheap, and packed with enough flavor to make you forget there wasn't any pork in sight. Sweet potatoes were a southern staple, affordable, nutritious, and easy to grow. Unlike white potatoes, they had a natural sweetness that made them versatile in both savory and sweet dishes. Combined with cornmeal, another low-cost kitchen essential, they created a filling, hearty meal that could be eaten on its own or served with eggs for breakfast. Seasonings varied by household. Some added cinnamon for warmth, others leaned into salt and pepper for a more savory bite. Families who grew up eating it remember the unmistakable sound of slices sizzling in a hot pan, the edges crisping up to golden perfection. Chicken fried steak. This classic is long gone but never forgotten. This one's pretty easy to make too. All you need is a chicken steak dredged in a seasoned flour mixture, dipped in a wet batter, and finally coated in a crispy breading. Fry till it's golden brown for the perfect dinner that'll leave you wanting more. Chicken fried steak is typically served with a creamy gravy for dipping, along with mashed potatoes and vegetables for a complete and oh-so-satisfying meal. It is basically American, and the yassified version of the Austrian dish Wiener Schnitzel, and the Italian dish cotoletta alla Milanese. Fancy names, but the same old fried chicken steak. Now I know what you're thinking. Why did this crispy golden goodness leave us too soon? Well, you can trick yourself all you want, but it's not the healthiest dinner out there. But hey, having a fried steak once in a while can't do much harm, right? Just be prepared for some finger-licking good action. This dish is messy, but in the best way possible. Once a staple of dinner parties and homecoming feasts, this elegant yet simple side dish was a favorite among home cooks looking to add a touch of sophistication to their meals. Crisp, tender green beans, lightly sautéed in butter and finished with toasted almonds, struck the perfect balance between freshness and richness. Green beans were one of the most accessible vegetables in American kitchens. Whether fresh, frozen, or canned, they were affordable and widely available year-round. Almonds, though slightly more expensive, were used sparingly, adding a crunchy contrast without overwhelming the dish. The preparation was straightforward. The beans were quickly blanched to preserve their bright color and firm texture, then tossed in a buttery skillet with slivered almonds for a nutty, golden brown finish. Some recipes included a squeeze of lemon or a sprinkle of garlic for extra depth. But as convenience cooking took hold, green bean almondine slowly faded from dinner tables. Canned green bean casseroles, loaded with processed ingredients, became the new standard, and simple, fresh preparations were overlooked in favor of heavier, creamier alternatives. Before we had Taco Tuesday, there were taco-style ground beef wraps, and they showed up whenever ground beef was on sale. Grandma would brown the beef in a skillet, toss in some chili powder, garlic salt, and maybe a spoonful of ketchup or tomato paste, then serve it up inside whatever bread she had around. Sometimes it was a tortilla, sometimes it was plain white sandwich bread folded in half. The seasoning was not store-bought. It was just whatever smelled right. Shredded lettuce, diced onions, or a sprinkle of cheese got added when there was time or leftovers from Sunday. These wraps were messy, fast, and full of flavor. The meat was soft and spicy. The bread was warm and soaked up all the juices. Kids would fold theirs tight and eat it in 2 bites. Adults would eat standing up by the sink, trying not to drop any. This was Tex-Mex before anyone called it that. Comfort food with no instructions and no fuss. Grandma just called it dinner. And somehow, it always hit the spot. Stretching ingredients wasn't just a skill in the 1960s, it was a necessity. When a handful of leftover meat and a few vegetables weren't enough for a full meal, they found new life inside a flaky pie crust, topped with a generous layer of mashed potatoes. Hoosier pie supper was an answer to the age-old question: what can we make with what we have? Midwestern families, especially in Indiana, had been making similar dishes for generations, influenced by their farming roots and a deep tradition of waste not cooking. Mashed potatoes were a constant in working-class households, cheap, filling, and easy to make in large batches. A single pie could take scraps of roast beef, bits of ham, or even just a few spoonfuls of vegetables and turn them into a meal hearty enough to satisfy a family after a long day's work. It was baked until golden brown, emerging from the oven as a warm, comforting dish that filled the house with a familiar, savory aroma. served with a ladle of brown gravy. It was about making sure nothing went to waste. In an era where food stretched as far as a paycheck, this dish wasn't just frugal, it was common sense wrapped in a flaky crust. In medieval Europe, fish and root vegetables were the most common thing for a majority of the population. Most of them could not afford to sustainably get meat every single time they went out for grocery shopping. It was also something that was really preferred by religious followers of the church, although I can't really imagine a specific reason why. For root vegetables, I can see veganism being something a well-intending church appreciates, but then why the meat? If there are any history buffs in the comments, let us know. Now, the dish itself would change a lot. This would heavily depend on the kind of climate and geography you were working with. Coastal regions, like along the North Sea or the Baltic, for example, had a dense ecosystem of marine life. They had herring, whiting, haddock and cod, salmon or crabs, and people would often just work with whatever the catch of the day was. These fish would be salted and dried as much as they could, both for inland trade and for winter preservation. Root vegetables were also dearly important to people because they were one of the few kinds of vegetables that could withstand poor soils and still last through the winter. One of these vegetables was the iconic carrot. And here's an interesting fact. In medieval times, you actually had purple and yellow carrots instead of orange. I can just imagine the satisfying experience of cutting through that tender beef with minimal effort. Swiss steak, a dinnertime classic that deserves a comeback. Where do I sign the petition? Lamb might seem like a fancy restaurant thing these days, but back in the day, it was a total dinnertime MVP. Lamb stew was a fan favorite at dinner parties back in the day, and I get the hype. Imagine the combination of melt-in-your-mouth lamb and an assortment of colorful vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and peas simmered in a rich, flavorful broth just begging to be soaked with some crusty bread. This is a dish that's guaranteed to warm you up from the inside out on a chilly day. Not to mention, it's surprisingly easy to make. Perfect for those nights when you want a delicious meal without spending hours in the kitchen. Just maybe don't tell your grandma you added a sprinkle of your favorite hot sauce. Some traditions are best left untouched. Lentil soups were even more common in the medieval world. They would change a lot depending on the region, though. For example, in Europe's southern regions like Provence and Spain, lentils were not only used to feed humans, but also to feed animals. Lentil pottages were one of the most important meals for the church as well, because when the fast would break, this was one of the few meals that could feed an entire group and still be very easy to prepare. Lentils would provide an incredible dose of protein, and it would need just water and a few other vegetables if you could spare them. Onions, leeks, and garlic, or just some savory or sage would work really well. In the Middle East and North Africa, lentil soups were something else entirely. Medieval Arab cookbooks like Anwa al-Saidala f Alwan al-Atima would feature all kinds of lentil recipes with an incredible amount of flavorings, seasonings, and spices to make it stand out from other dishes. It would be a lot more bombastic and flavorful than European versions of the same dish, and if looking at today's world is any example, I think it's historically accurate to say that they've always had us beat when it comes to working with legumes. Side dishes were once as thoughtfully prepared as the main course, and few were as simple yet elegant as a well-roasted carrot medley. Coated in honey, butter, and a hint of cinnamon, this dish was a staple at homecoming dinners, adding a touch of natural sweetness to balance out heavier meats and casseroles. Carrots were a practical choice for home cooks. They were cheap, easy to store, and available year-round, making them a kitchen essential. Roasting them brought out their natural sugars, and when paired with honey and warm spices, they became more than just a side dish. They were a highlight. Some versions used maple syrup instead, while others incorporated fresh herbs for a more savory twist. No matter the variation, the result was always a vibrant, glossy medley of tender carrots with a flavor profile that felt both nostalgic and indulgent. As processed vegetable sides and microwave steamed bags took over grocery store shelves, many home cooks stopped roasting vegetables altogether. Instead of taking the time to caramelize their natural flavors, people opted for pre-cut and pre-cooked options. Baked apples with honey were such an incredible medieval dish that they were especially for any kind of party or celebration. The baking was always done near the fire or a hearth oven, and the dish was incredibly simple. It really was just an apple that was baked whole with honey drizzled over it, or sometimes they would simply dip the whole thing in honey. People would also boil the apples first and then bake them to get a dish that resembled the texture of apple pudding as we know it today. This dish was eaten at the end of a course or as a fast day meal, and honey and apples were things that you could eat on days where you had to fast. The combination of a softened, decadent apple mixed in with caramelized golden honey was something that scratched all the right itches. Baked apples with honey had an incredibly strong association with festive and seasonal meals, and they were particularly really popular around harvest and Christmas. Apples were abundant, and honey was something that people could spare sometimes for the right kind of occasion. This dish is something you see in medical texts, estate records, cookbooks, and other medieval-era references. Apples were also prized because of how easy they were to store. Break time. 1 second. Roast chicken with stuffing and green beans is a meal that evokes family gatherings, holidays, and a sense of home. This classic dinner has long been a centerpiece of American dining, combining practicality with elegance. Roasting chicken is one of the oldest cooking methods, but by the 20th century, it became a weekly tradition for many households. Chickens were relatively inexpensive, easy to prepare, and, if seasoned and roasted just right, deliciously satisfying. The key to a perfect roast chicken lies in the balance: crispy, golden skin on the outside and juicy, flavorful meat inside. Stuffing or dressing, depending on your regional preference, traces back to ancient Rome. By the time it reached American kitchens, cooks used bread cubes, herbs, and sometimes vegetables to create the savory, aromatic side we know today. While traditionally cooked inside the bird, many began baking it separately for a crispier texture, what some might call progress. Green beans complete this trio, often sautéed with garlic, almonds, or a touch of bacon. They brought a fresh, vibrant contrast to the richness of the chicken and stuffing. If you roast a chicken and make stuffing, you're not just making dinner, you're making memories. And for anyone who's ever had the leftovers, the memories taste just as good the next day. Salmon patties with saltine crumbs were a classic end-of-the-week dinner, the kind of meal you made when the fridge looked sad and the meat was long gone. Canned salmon was a miracle in itself, cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with enough protein to make you feel like you had not missed a step. Grandma would mix it up with crushed saltine crackers, a beaten egg, and maybe a sprinkle of onion or celery if there was any left. She would form them into small patties and fry them in the same pan that had seen 5 meals already. The result? Golden, crispy outsides with soft, savory centers. They had just enough flavor to make you forget they came from a can and not the sea. Served with peas or creamed corn, or just a dollop of mayonnaise on the side, it was the kind of humble meal that never needed applause. It showed up quietly, did its job, and vanished without complaint. But it left everyone full and just a little more hopeful. That is what dinner was supposed to do. Not impressed, not sparkle, just comfort. And that is exactly what these little salmon cakes delivered. On sweltering summer days, a crisp and refreshing side wins hearts with minimal fuss. Thinly sliced cucumbers tossed in a tangy dressing highlight how speed and convenience can merge seamlessly with satisfying taste. Historians trace cucumber cultivation back over 3,000 years, with evidence in ancient India, though the tradition of quickly pickling them for salads gained traction much later. Food enthusiasts joke that this dish is the best way to turn a watery green vegetable into a bona fide star at potlucks. Each bite offers a cool snap balanced by a delicate vinegar kick, creating a pleasing contrast in both flavor and texture. The process remains remarkably straightforward. Slice, season, stir, and serve. This simplicity and accessibility make it appealing for busy households, ensuring that even novice cooks can achieve a crowd-pleasing result. Some add onions, others incorporate dill or a pinch of sugar for extra zest, reflecting how flexible this old favorite can be. Indeed, cucumbers contain a high water content, which supports hydration, practical for those warm months when thirst quenching is essential. Monkey meat sandwiches were quick, required no cooking, and made use of pantry staples that were cheap, long-lasting, and easy to find. Corned beef was a product of necessity, not luxury. During World War II, canned meats became a lifeline due to rationing, and even after the war ended, they remained a budget-friendly option for working-class families. The addition of mayonnaise provided richness, while relish balanced it out with a tangy bite. Served between two slices of white bread, another inexpensive household staple, it was a no-fuss meal that filled stomachs without emptying wallets. For kids, it was a lunchtime classic, packed into metal lunchboxes alongside an apple and a thermos of milk. For parents, it was a way to make something out of almost nothing. Some might cringe at the thought today, but back then, this frugal creation was a reminder that resourcefulness often tasted better than it sounded. Biscuits and sausage gravy. Okay. This southern staple might still be a thing in some parts of the country, but let's be real, biscuits and sausage gravy is definitely not dominating breakfast menus anymore. I guess waffles are to blame for that. But this breakfast legend is the perfect combination of fluffy buttermilk biscuits so light and airy they practically melt in your mouth, along with a creamy sausage gravy, rich with savory sausage and speckled with black pepper. This is a breakfast, or hey, no judgment here, even a dinner combination that's pure comfort food heaven. From the perfect hangover cure to a delicious weekend treat, biscuits and sausage gravy satisfy all cravings. Just maybe lay off the white clothes while you're indulging. That sausage gravy can be a bit enthusiastic when it comes to staining. Few side dishes could bridge the gap between savory and sweet as effortlessly as corn pudding. A staple of Southern and Midwestern homecoming dinners, this dish combined farm-fresh simplicity with a rich, custard-like texture. Families often served it alongside roasted meats or holiday spreads, where its golden hue and delicate sweetness made it a comforting favorite. Whether fresh off the cob in the summer or canned in colder months, it was inexpensive and widely available. This recipe used basic pantry staples, butter, milk, eggs, and a touch of sugar to create a dish that felt indulgent despite its humble ingredients. Baking was the preferred method, allowing the custard to set while keeping the kernels tender. Some families swore by a cast-iron skillet, while others used deep casserole dishes to achieve that perfect golden crust. Recipes varied. Some included a splash of vanilla, others added a pinch of nutmeg. But the result was always a creamy, spoonable side that paired with almost anything. As processed cornbread mixes and quick-fix alternatives took over, traditional corn pudding was left behind. But for those who remember its warm, velvety bite, it's a dish worth bringing back. Spaghetti with meatballs and garlic bread is an iconic meal that combines Italian tradition with American innovation. While pasta with tomato sauce has roots deep in Italian cuisine, the pairing of spaghetti with meatballs became popular in the United States in the early 20th century, thanks to Italian immigrants looking to recreate familiar dishes in a new land. The meatball itself is believed to have evolved from a mix of ground meats, herbs, and breadcrumbs, often made from leftovers. In Italy, smaller meatballs were served as part of a larger meal, but when Italian-American cooks began to serve them as a standalone dish, they became the hearty centerpiece of spaghetti dinners. The combination of savory meatballs, tomato sauce, and long strands of spaghetti soon became synonymous with comfort and family meals. No spaghetti dinner would be complete without garlic bread. While garlic bread wasn't traditionally Italian, it quickly became a staple in American Italian cuisine. The golden, crispy texture of the bread, combined with the rich garlic butter, complements the pasta perfectly. Sloppy Joes had already earned their place in the American kitchen by the time Grandma figured out how to make them faster. Instead of hamburger buns, she grabbed slices of toast, whatever white sandwich bread was left in the bread box. Ground beef got tossed into the skillet with a little onion, then drowned in a quick mix of ketchup, mustard, and a pinch of sugar if you had it. No special seasonings, no packets, no fuss. Once the mixture was bubbling, it got spooned right over the toast and served just like that, open-faced, hot, and ready to fall apart in your hands. That was half the fun. It dripped, it stained your fingers, and it always tasted better the messier it was. This was a dinner for families who were too tired to sit proper but still wanted to eat together. It was loud, quick, and honest. And even though it came from a time of tight belts and short patience, it tasted like something you might pay good money for at a diner today. That is the thing about Sloppy Joe toast. It always fed more than just your stomach. Turkey and gravy, traditionally a centerpiece of Thanksgiving but often enjoyed beyond the holiday season, holds a special place in American culinary history. Its pairing with mashed turnips, though less common today, harkens back to a time when root vegetables were staples in kitchens for their affordability and long storage life. Turkey has been an American icon since colonial days. Benjamin Franklin famously praised the bird, calling it a much more respectable bird than the bald eagle. While roasting turkey might be associated with grand feasts, smaller versions, like turkey breasts, frequently appeared on mid-century dinner tables, making the meal more practical for everyday cooking. The star of the plate, next to the turkey, is the gravy. Made from the drippings left in the pan, it's rich, savory, and ties everything together. A good gravy, as some would say, can salvage even a dry turkey. Often overshadowed by mashed potatoes, turnips were a go-to side dish in earlier generations. Packed with nutrients and a slightly peppery flavor, they offered a lighter, unique alternative to spuds. Mashed with butter, cream, or even a touch of maple syrup, they brought earthy warmth to the plate. If turkey is the headliner, gravy is the conductor. And turnips? They're the backup singers you never knew you needed. A harmonious meal indeed. Poor people would have very limited options for food back then. While you might think that since there weren't any taxes, jobs, or grocery store price bumps to worry about, that doesn't necessarily mean it was easier. They had to rely on whatever they could forage, whatever they could grow, and whatever was easiest to buy. Oat gruel was a dish that basically became synonymous with being down on your luck because of this. Oats have, for centuries, been the silver lining in a deeply hungry and bad situation for a lot of people. But that was especially true during medieval times. Oat gruel is pretty much prison food, too. Ever see those shows where the guy gets a porridge-looking slope of food? That's pretty much it. While it was nutritious and it had protein, the biggest reason people ate it was because of the amounts of fiber present in it. It would keep them full for much longer in the day and lead to less hunger pangs, but it also meant that they were continuously losing body fat without being able to make too much muscle. We're really starting to explore the deep end of medieval countryside cuisine now, so I hope you're still tuned. Our next item happens to be turnip stew, which is a textbook example of how people got their nutrition in those times. Potatoes were not actually the most widespread ingredient like they are today. It used to be turnips. This was especially true for Europe, where potatoes arrived by the 16th century. Turnips were favored because they could be preserved very easily in root cellars for winter. They were really easy to grow in poor soils, and they were hardy. Also, this was one of the few crops where even its root was edible. It wasn't a dish that had a lot of guidelines to follow, so in that respect it was a lot similar to how pottage worked. People would throw in whatever herbs, roots, aromatics, and scraps of meat and protein they had. One of the best things that would go along with turnip stew if it was available was beetroot and eggplant, which might be a surprise combination for you to hear, but was actually fairly common back then. Hamburger crumble over mashed potatoes felt like a backwards meatloaf, and that was exactly the point. Instead of baking everything together, Grandma browned the ground beef in a skillet, sometimes with onions, sometimes with just salt and pepper. Then she would whip up instant mashed potatoes or use leftovers from the night before. The beef went right on top, hot, greasy, and just barely seasoned, soaking into the potatoes like gravy. It was fast. It was easy. It was the kind of dinner you made when nobody could agree on anything but they all needed to eat. No ketchup glaze, no breadcrumbs, just the bare bones of a meat and potatoes meal. It was humble, but filling, messy, but comforting. And every now and then she would throw some peas on top or a handful of cheese. But even plain, it worked. It always worked. In homes where food had to stretch, this was one of the smartest tricks in the book. You know, back when Grandma used to put on the apron and cook for us, this dish really was the one-pot wonder. Bonus points. If your grandma used to whip this up for you, that nostalgia factor is real. A version of it still exists in Bulgarian cuisine in case you crave the it now. The Bulgarians are a little light on the paprika and center the dish on sautéed onions. For decades, stuffed bell peppers were a staple of the American dinner table. They were practical, inexpensive, and packed with flavor. Families in the mid-20th century relied on simple, hearty meals, and this dish delivered. With just a few basic ingredients, ground beef, rice, tomatoes, and a well-seasoned filling, home cooks could create a meal that was both satisfying and visually appealing. Peppers were an accessible ingredient, easy to grow in backyard gardens and cheap at the store. Their natural shape made them the perfect edible container, eliminating the need for extra cookware. The filling, often stretched with rice to make the meat go further, was an economical way to feed a large family on a budget. Baked until tender, the peppers absorbed the savory juices, creating a dish that was both rustic and comforting. But as convenience foods took over, stuffed peppers began to fade from dinner rotations. The rise of prepackaged meals and fast food options meant fewer people were willing to spend time hollowing out peppers and slow-baking a homemade filling. Today, the dish still makes an occasional appearance in nostalgic cookbooks, but it's no longer a household staple. This was not just a baked bean and hot dog dinner. This was the working family's answer to hunger, chaos, and a kitchen clock that never slowed down. Grandma would take a can of baked beans, thick, sweet, and molasses dark, and heat it slowly on the stove. Then came the franks, sliced into coins and tossed in until they plumped up like little balloons. Sometimes she would add a spoonful of brown sugar or a shake of mustard, but most nights she just stirred and served. It was hot, sticky, smoky, and completely effortless. The beans coated the franks like syrup over pancakes, and it went best with a buttered slice of toast or a side of cornbread if the oven was already warm. Kids would gobble it down in minutes. Grown-ups would sigh, eat quietly, and go back for seconds. It was the kind of stovetop magic that made do with what you had and somehow made it taste better than it should. You never forgot the smell. And even if you rolled your eyes when she made it, you would ask for it again once life got harder and you needed something easy. That is what made it a keeper. Curd cheese with herbs is a really good example of how even the simplest of ingredients and medieval-era foods could be turned into perfectly nice snacks or lunches. Curd cheese was also known as white cheese, and it wasn't like hard cheese. This one was much more readily available and quicker to make. You would curdle the milk with rennet and vinegar, and then you would drain all the way to leave a really soft and fresh curd. This was extremely common in households where dairy herds and weekly cheese making was done so that milk could be prevented from spoiling. Europe also, interestingly enough, had different names for this depending on what areas you would find yourself in. Places that largely spoke German, for example, would call it quark. It was known as brocue in certain parts of France. Also in urban homes or wealthier ones, curd cheese would be made with spices and served with fruits for a nice little sweet and savory twist. Cheesy broccoli and rice casserole is a dish that may just be the ultimate comfort food. It's the kind of meal that fills the house with an irresistible aroma, combining the earthiness of broccoli, the warmth of rice, and the creamy richness of cheese. Its popularity skyrocketed in the 1960s, when casseroles became a go-to for busy families looking for easy, satisfying meals. The origin of this casserole can be traced back to the post-war era when convenience foods, like canned soups and processed cheeses, took center stage. The combination of broccoli and rice, often bound together with a can of creamy mushroom soup, was an affordable and filling way to stretch ingredients. Over time, home cooks started adding their own twists, incorporating cheddar cheese, garlic, and even a crunchy breadcrumb topping for texture. While it's easy to dismiss cheesy broccoli and rice casserole as just another side dish, it's also the type of meal that can easily steal the spotlight at dinner. It's a versatile dish, whether served alongside a roast chicken or as the main event for a meatless dinner. Cheesy broccoli and rice casserole is the ultimate kitchen hack. Tastes gourmet, takes no time, and leaves everyone smiling. It's the kind of dish that proves simplicity can be deliciously satisfying. For families stretching their grocery budget, few meals delivered as much flavor and comfort as these unusual-looking meatballs. A product of the Great Depression and wartime rationing, porcupine meatballs were a creative way to make ground beef go further. Mixing rice into the meat wasn't just for texture. It bulked up the meal, making a pound of beef feed more mouths. Rice was an affordable pantry staple, and when the meatballs simmered in a tangy tomato sauce, the grains softened and expanded, giving them their signature spiky appearance. Despite the name, no porcupines were harmed in the making of this dish. Just a bit of kitchen ingenuity at work. Some recipes used canned tomato soup for a mild, creamy sauce, while others relied on crushed tomatoes and Worcestershire sauce for a sharper kick. Either way, the slow cooking process allowed the flavors to meld into a hearty, stick-to-your-ribs meal. For decades, this dish was a go-to for busy home cooks. It was easy, required minimal ingredients, and could be made in one pot, ideal for feeding a growing family. But as convenience foods and pre-made meatballs filled grocery store freezers, the homemade version started to disappear. Tomato juice and saltine cracker plates were a real thing, and not just when someone was sick. It was a quick supper, especially in the summer or when the kitchen felt too hot to touch. A cold glass of tomato juice poured straight from the can sat beside a stack of saltines and a wedge of cheese. That was the whole plate. No pan, no oven, no prep. Just cold, salty, sharp, and simple. It was a meal you could put together with one hand while holding a baby in the other. Some people dunked the crackers into the juice. Others spread the cheese and took slow bites. It was not much, but on nights when time was short and appetites were small, it was enough. And there was something oddly satisfying about it. Something clean, cool, and just familiar enough to bring a little peace to the end of the day. During mid-century potlucks, families often relied on pantry staples to whip up vibrant dishes at a moment's notice. This colorful medley typically combined different canned beans, chopped onions, and a simple vinaigrette, celebrating speed and convenience above all else. Culinary historians credit post-war marketing campaigns with popularizing the humble bean mix, as home cooks saw it as a thrifty and reliable way to feed guests quickly. The sweet and sour tang, balanced by the satisfying texture of tender beans, continues to evoke nostalgia for summertime picnics and cheerful backyard gatherings. Many laud its simplicity and accessibility, noting that nothing more than a can opener and a basic chopping board is required. Some households toss in bell peppers or celery for crunch, while others prefer a sprinkling of herbs to add brightness. Flavor and texture remain paramount. Each bite merges the mild creaminess of beans with the zesty snap of onions and vinegar. A few comedic fans joke that bean salad is the ultimate test of group etiquette. There's always that one person who can't resist more helpings, and they're not shy about it. Rye pancakes are a fantastic option to go for if you have a family of 4 and live in prehistoric times. They were one of the most common recipes, despite what you might be thinking. These people were still walking around wearing chainmail armor and robes, so how'd they end up having pancakes? Well, they're actually pretty different from the kinds of pancakes we're used to today. These are just rye flour, water, some salt, and that's it. It makes a batter that can be ladled, but most people would typically just pour it onto a griddle or a hot stone suspended over a hearth. This was the most common way to cook desserts or breakfast in these times. If you were lucky enough to have milk or buttermilk, you could replace the water with that, and it would usually make them a bit more tender. People typically fried these in butter or animal fat. Well, if it wasn't a fasting day. Rye usually does not need to be flavored much, but what flavorings people did use, they were very different from what we have today. People used stewed vegetables, onions and garlic instead of Miracle Whip, rainbow sprinkles, and maple syrup. Another one you might be surprised to see in a video about medieval-era recipes is honey and oat cakes. Oats were really common in northern and western regions like Ireland, Scandinavia, and Scotland, and this was because the climate was really cold. It was much easier to grow them than, let's say, wheat. Oats were something that would thrive in poor soils, and they also had shorter growing seasons, which meant that they became a pristine source of food when times were tough and you were running low in your pantry. A very basic oat cake would typically be made from coarsely ground oatmeal, water, and some salt, and this mix would be made into a slightly hard dough, rolled very thin, and then cooked on a baking stone. These were durable, portable, and crispy, so they were the perfect meal for long journeys. Alongside some honey, which was the primary sweetener before sugar, it was one of the best meals you could have for celebrations. While people did use them in their daily lives, rural peasants most often got to enjoy them during festivals and religious holidays in monasteries. It's also interesting to note that honey was seen as a bounty of the earth that carried divine favor, and so honey and oat cakes were seen as a good blessing for wedding feasts. There was something almost ceremonial about pan-fried potatoes and onions with an egg on top. Grandma would cube the potatoes, chop the onions, and let them sizzle in a cast-iron skillet until they were browned and crispy. The smell alone could carry through the whole house. At the very end, she would crack an egg right into the center and let it cook sunny side up, the yolk just soft enough to run a little when you cut into it. No meat, no toast, just 3 simple ingredients that together felt like more than enough. This was dinner for lean weeks, meatless Fridays, or long stretches between paychecks. The potatoes filled you up, the onions gave it flavor, and the egg brought everything together. It was hearty, honest, and completely satisfying. Served in a bowl or straight from the skillet, it made the kind of meal that slowed you down and reminded you to be grateful, even if all you had was a sack of potatoes and a few eggs left in the carton. These were meals that came from resourcefulness, not recipes, and somehow that always tasted better. Stuffed chicken rolls. Don't you dare confuse these with Mickey D's chicken nuggets. Stuffed chicken rolls are the dinner of every kid's dream, 'cause who wouldn't want this cheesy goodness instead of some plain old broccoli soup? Imagine thin sliced chicken breasts pounded to tender perfection, and then filled with a savory mixture of seasoned ground ham and melty cheese. Stuffed chicken rolls are a great way to elevate a simple chicken breast, and they're perfect for a special occasion or a fancy weeknight dinner. They're surprisingly easy to make, so don't be intimidated by their fancy appearance. Despite its appeal, stuffed chicken rolls have become less common as people opt for simpler, quicker meals. This has to be by far one of America's greatest inventions, because even though it has vanished from dinner tables in the States, other nations around the world are devouring them. A true testament to how simple ingredients can create something extraordinary, corn pudding casserole with a sweet custard base is a comforting classic. With its rich, custardy texture and subtle sweetness, it's a comforting side that's just as at home at Thanksgiving as it is at a Sunday family dinner. Corn pudding has roots in early American cooking, influenced by Native American corn-based dishes like succotash. However, the casserole version, often made with a combination of cornmeal, eggs, milk, and sugar, emerged in the 19th century as settlers began adapting recipes to make use of what was readily available. The sweet custard base, made with eggs and cream or milk, gives the dish its signature smooth, slightly sweet texture that contrasts perfectly with the corn kernels. It's also a dish that evolved with convenience in mind. As canned creamed corn became widely available in the mid-20th century, many home cooks began using it to simplify preparation without sacrificing flavor. Corn pudding is a crowd pleaser, and its versatility allows for adjustments. Some might add a touch of cheese, while others prefer to keep it pure. Remember when your mom used to whip you up lunch for school along with a heartfelt note and a sweet treat? Meat and potato patties were a staple back in the day and a hit in the lunchbox. If you've got some leftover mashed potatoes lying around, you've got to try these. Yeah, these are basically patties made out of mashed potatoes combined with seasoned ground meat, shaped into little discs, and fried till golden brown. They pair perfectly with ketchup, your favorite dipping sauce, or even a dollop of sour cream for a tangy twist. Meat and potato patties are the ultimate finger food that is still a hit to this day. Well, with McDonald's French fries on the rise, these really don't make an appearance that often, but you can whip these patties up anytime. They're surprisingly easy to make. Just give your mom a call and ask for the recipe. Egg salad melts on English muffins were Grandma's way of stretching a dozen eggs across a week. She would boil a batch at the start of the week, mash them up with mayonnaise, mustard, a pinch of salt, and maybe some chopped celery if it was in the drawer. Then, when dinner time came and the fridge was looking bare, she would pull out a few English muffins, split them open, and pile on the egg salad. A slice of cheese went on top, American, cheddar, or whatever was left, and it all went under the broiler for a minute or two. The edges of the muffins crisped, the cheese bubbled, the egg salad warmed and got just the right kind of messy. It was not elegant, but it was real. It was food you could eat with one hand and clean up with the other, and it made a dozen eggs stretch a whole lot farther than you thought possible. Meals like this did not just feed people. They taught you how to make do, stay full, and carry on. With a name that evokes a French bistro and a flavor that feels like home-cooked comfort, chicken fricassee bridges the gap between elegance and nostalgia. This classic combines tender chicken with a creamy, flavorful sauce and an assortment of vegetables. The roots of chicken fricassee lie in French cuisine, with the term fricassee appearing as early as the 15th century. What sets it apart is the technique. Chicken pieces are first browned lightly, then simmered slowly in a sauce that often blends broth, cream, and a touch of white wine. Julia Child famously described it as halfway between a sauté and a stew, and if Julia said it, it must be true. Vegetables like carrots, celery, mushrooms, and pearl onions elevate the dish, adding texture and natural sweetness to complement the savory chicken. In many American households, this meal became a way to transform humble ingredients into something elegant. While its name might sound intimidating, chicken fricassee is surprisingly practical. It's one pot, easy to make, and the leftovers taste even better the next day, if they survive that long. Fricassee is the dish that makes you feel like you've been to Paris, even if your passport expired decades ago. Okay, creamed spinach and pearl onions didn't look the most appetizing, but trust me, it was always a hit at family dinners. Think of a rich, creamy base packed with vibrant green spinach leaves. And let's not forget the star of the show, pearl onions, that added the perfect touch of sweetness. Not only was this dinner finger-licking delicious, but it was healthy too. Jam-packed with nutrients including vitamins A, C, and K, iron, folate, potassium, and a good amount of fiber. Just don't blame me if you get flashbacks to your school cafeteria. But hey, sometimes those cafeteria classics deserve a second chance, especially when they're this delicious and healthy all at the same time. American Goulash Light was less of a recipe and more of a formula. Meat, pasta, and tomatoes in whatever shape you could get. Elbow macaroni was the go-to because it cooked fast and filled up the pot. Grandma would brown a little ground beef, drain off the grease, and toss it with stewed tomatoes straight from the can. No sauce, no simmering, no drama. Sometimes she added a bit of onion or garlic salt, but usually it was just whatever she had on hand. The pasta would soak up the tomato juice until it was soft and tangy, and the beef added just enough flavor to make it stick to your ribs. Served in bowls with a sprinkle of grated cheese, if you were lucky, it was dinner. Fast. It was not the baked casserole version you see in magazines. This was goulash stripped down to its bones, made for people who needed food on the table in 10 minutes or less. And the best part? It was good. Really good. No breadcrumbs, no baking dish, no long prep. Just one skillet, one spoon, and a whole lot of knowing what mattered. That is how Grandma cooked. With roots in Southern cooking, smothered chicken with onions and gravy is the perfect blend of crispy chicken, tender onions, and rich gravy that makes you want to go back for seconds, and maybe even thirds. Smothering food, whether it's chicken, pork chops, or beef, is an iconic Southern technique. The term smothered refers to cooking the meat slowly in its own juices or a flavorful sauce, often with onions or bell peppers, until it's tender and full of flavor. For this dish, the chicken is first browned to achieve a crispy golden skin before being smothered in sautéed onions and a gravy made from pan drippings. The result is a plate of food that's pure comfort. Gravy, of course, is the magic behind smothered chicken. Made from the fond left in the pan after frying, it's rich and savory. sometimes thickened with flour or cornstarch and seasoned to perfection. And those onions caramelize beautifully, adding sweetness and depth to every bite. Smothered chicken is like a hug on a plate, if that hug could also be crispy and covered in gravy. It's a dish that brings people to the table, no matter the occasion. Pork chops with apples on toast was one of Grandma's best fancy in 5 minutes tricks. She would take a thin cut of pork, season it with salt and pepper, and pan-fry it in butter until golden brown and just cooked through. Meanwhile, she would warm up canned or stewed apples, sometimes spiced with cinnamon or cloves. A thick slice of toast would go down on the plate first, then the pork chop, and finally a generous spoonful of those sweet, soft apples on top. It looked like something you would get in a country diner, but it took less than 10 minutes in her kitchen. The toast soaked up the juices. The pork brought the savory. The apples added just enough sweetness to make it feel special. No one called it gourmet, but no one left a bite behind either. It was a clever mix of pantry staples and leftover odds and ends, dressed up just enough to make you sit a little straighter at the table. And it reminded you, even a 10-minute dinner could feel like something worth slowing down for. Fish sticks, those crispy, golden-breaded delights, have been a fixture of American family dinners since the mid-20th century. While their origins date back to the early 1950s, when commercial frozen food production boomed, fish sticks quickly became a go-to for busy families. Made from white fish, typically cod or pollock, these little rectangular pieces of seafood are battered and deep-fried to perfection, making them as crunchy on the outside as they are tender on the inside. The classic pairing of fish sticks with tartar sauce elevates the meal. Tartar sauce, a tangy combination of mayonnaise, pickles, and lemon juice, adds a creamy contrast to the crispy fish. While the sauce has its roots in French cuisine, it became a beloved accompaniment to fish and chips, and later to fish sticks in the US. On the side, coleslaw, a salad made from finely shredded raw cabbage, carrots, and a tangy dressing, has been a popular addition to fish dishes for generations. Its crisp texture and slightly sweet flavor balance out the richness of the fish and tartar sauce. Egg noodles with butter and garlic salt were Grandma's way of saying, "I know we are broke, but I will still feed you something warm." Boil the noodles, drain them fast, and throw in a chunk of butter while they were still steaming. Then came the garlic salt. Never garlic powder, never fresh cloves. Garlic salt was always the trick. Just a few shakes, stirred in with a wooden spoon, and the whole bowl came to life. It was buttery, salty, and smelled like comfort. You could eat it straight or add peas, chopped ham, or a sprinkle of Parmesan if you had any. But it did not need much. This was a meal that expected nothing and gave everything. It filled the house with warmth and the table with quiet. There was no story behind it, no secret ingredient, no hand-me-down recipe, just butter, garlic salt, and time. Sometimes that was all you needed. This creamy, savory casserole, ham tetrazzini with egg noodles, showcases how a few simple ingredients can be transformed into something truly special. While turkey tetrazzini is more commonly known, ham tetrazzini became a popular variation, especially for using up leftover holiday ham in a way that felt both indulgent and comforting. Named after Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, this dish originally featured chicken or turkey, often paired with a creamy sauce, mushrooms, and a variety of seasonings. The exact origin of ham tetrazzini is unclear, but the combination of a rich, buttery sauce and tender ham makes it a favorite for families seeking a hearty, filling meal. Egg noodles, thanks to their soft texture and ability to absorb sauces, are the perfect base for this casserole. When tossed with the ham and creamy sauce, they turn into a flavorful foundation that holds everything together. A sprinkle of Parmesan cheese on top before baking creates a golden, bubbly crust that takes the dish to another level. There is something about a fried bologna sandwich with yellow mustard that never really leaves you. Grandma would slice a thick round of bologna and toss it onto a hot skillet. As it browned, it would puff up in the center, curling into a little cup with crisp edges and sizzling sides. She would slap it onto a slice of white bread, smear on some yellow mustard, the real kind, tangy and bright, and folded up like a letter you could eat. That was dinner. No side dish, no dessert, just a hot sandwich that hit the spot in less than 5 minutes. The smell of frying bologna was unmistakable. Part school lunch, part diner counter, part home. It was cheap, fast, and unforgettable. You might not see it on a dinner menu, but it fed generations of kids and kept more than a few households running when money ran thin. And if you ever had one fresh off the skillet, you probably still remember the first bite. Steamed clams, a beloved dish especially along the coasts of New England, have been enjoyed for generations. This dish is a true celebration of seafood, as fresh clams are steamed until tender, absorbing all the flavors of the broth, often seasoned with garlic, herbs, and a splash of white wine or broth. Clams, which are bivalve mollusks, have been a staple in coastal cuisine for centuries, with Native Americans harvesting them long before European settlers arrived. The joy of eating steamed clams comes from their delicate texture and briny sweetness. The perfect clam should pop open easily when steamed, a sign that it's cooked just right. Paired with a slice of hearty brown bread and a dollop of butter, this dish becomes a complete, satisfying meal. The richness of the butter and the rustic flavor of the brown bread perfectly complement the clam's natural saltiness, creating a balanced, indulgent experience. Steamed clams with brown bread, because sometimes the best meals are the ones that come with their own dipping sauce. The dish reflects the simplicity of coastal living, proving that the freshest ingredients often make the most memorable meals. Whether served as an appetizer or a main course, steamed clams with brown bread and butter remain a timeless favorite, offering a taste of the sea with every bite. Cheesy macaroni and egg scramble was one of those late-night meals that turned into a weeknight tradition. It started when there was leftover macaroni in the fridge, plain, boiled, and sitting cold in a bowl. Grandma would crack in some eggs, sprinkle a handful of shredded cheese, and toss it all into a buttered skillet. The eggs cooked fast, clinging to the pasta like a soft coat, while the cheese melted into every corner. A quick stir here, a little salt there, and dinner was done before the plates were even on the table. It looked like a mess. It tasted like magic. The noodles gave the scramble some bite, and the eggs made it feel like more than just leftovers. If there was ham or hot dog slices in the fridge, they got tossed in too. It was warm, filling, and cheap. 3 things every dinner needed to be. Nobody asked for it in a restaurant, but everyone remembered it once they moved out and had to make their own meals. That is the power of recipes like this. They live in your muscle memory, even when the recipe card is long gone. Spanish rice with tomatoes and green peppers, a flavorful side dish that has graced American tables for decades. Despite its name, it's actually more of a Mexican-American creation, born out of the fusion of traditional Spanish and Mexican cooking. The rich, savory base comes from simmering rice in a seasoned tomato sauce, with green peppers adding a touch of sweetness and color. The origins of Spanish rice can be traced to the influence of the Spanish in Mexico during the colonial period. The use of rice as a staple ingredient spread throughout Latin America, evolving into countless variations. In the United States, especially during the mid-20th century, Spanish rice became a popular side dish to accompany everything from tacos to fried chicken. The addition of green peppers, onions, and garlic to the dish added layers of flavor that made it even more satisfying. Spanish rice with tomatoes and peppers is the side dish that's just as colorful as it is delicious. So much flavor, it almost steals the show. It's a versatile, easy-to-make dish that always pairs well with a variety of main courses. Grilled cheese and pineapple sandwiches were one of Grandma's best-kept secrets, the kind of meal that made you raise an eyebrow right before you fell in love with it. It started like any grilled cheese, with slices of bread and whatever cheese was available. But right before the second slice went on, she would place a canned pineapple ring right in the middle of the sandwich. Then it all went into the skillet with butter hissing underneath. The cheese melted, the pineapple softened, the bread crisped to a golden crunch. The end result? A sandwich that was both savory and sweet, crispy and juicy. It was like dinner and dessert in one bite, and it somehow worked better than anyone expected. She made it on Fridays, or on days when the pantry was almost bare, but the craving for something different was strong. The smell of warm pineapple and browned butter filled the house and lingered even after the dishes were done. Kids loved it. Grown-ups pretended they did not, until they asked for seconds. It was quick, clever, and full of unexpected joy. Just like her. Few dishes command attention quite like a well-prepared crown roast. Traditionally served at homecoming dinners and holiday gatherings, it was the kind of dish that made guests stop and admire before the first bite. The ring of bone-in pork chops, arranged in a regal circle, was as much about presentation as it was about flavor. For families looking to impress without breaking the bank, the pork crown roast was a surprisingly economical choice. Pork was, and still is, one of the most affordable meats, and butchers often offered deals on bulk cuts. The apricot glaze, a key feature of this recipe, added just the right balance of sweetness and depth, while a bread-based stuffing packed the center for an even heartier meal. Preparing this dish took skill and patience. The roast had to be properly Frenched, tied, and slow-cooked to achieve that juicy, tender texture. But for many home cooks, the challenge was worth the reward. Unfortunately, as home butchering became a lost art and families shifted toward convenience meals, the crown roast started to disappear from dinner tables. Tamale pie is an American dish that brings together the heartiness of ground beef, the comfort of a cornmeal topping, and a blend of savory seasonings that make it a family favorite. While the name might suggest a traditional tamale, tamale pie is actually a casserole that layers these ingredients for a meal that's both satisfying and easy to make. The dish likely has its roots in the Southwest, where tamales have been a staple in Mexican cuisine for centuries. However, tamale pie emerged in the United States in the mid-20th century as a more accessible version, taking the flavors of tamales and turning them into a bake. Ground beef is browned with onions, garlic, and chili powder, then topped with a cornmeal batter and baked until golden. The result is a savory pie with a cornmeal crust that mimics the texture of a tamale. Tamale pie quickly became a favorite for home cooks thanks to its simplicity and versatility. It could be customized with ingredients like cheese, olives, or even jalapenos to suit personal tastes. Some families served it with a side of cornbread or a dollop of sour cream for extra richness. Tamale pie is proof that you don't need a fancy tamale press to make a meal that's full of flavor. Simple, hearty, and always a crowd pleaser. Cornbread and buttermilk in a bowl might not sound like much, but it was a whole supper to folks who knew how to stretch a dollar. Grandma would crumble leftover cornbread into a dish, pour cold buttermilk right on top, and hand it over with a spoon. That was it. No cooking, no warming up. Just cold, tangy, crumbly simplicity. It was a Southern staple that made its way into kitchens all across America, especially during hot months or tight times. Some people added salt. Others stirred in a little honey. But most just ate it as it was, a strange but surprisingly filling meal that stuck with you. The cornbread soaked up the buttermilk, softening into something almost like a pudding. It was not meant to impress, just to nourish, and for a lot of families, it was all they needed at the end of a long day. It was cheap, it was easy, and most importantly, it got the job done. That is the kind of dinner that deserved a place in every old cookbook, which used to be one of the best things to get in medieval European food culture. There's a lot to go over here. Simply put, though, pottage was something that was a hybrid between a soup and a stew. You had a few grains, vegetables, and sometimes protein like fish or meat, but this would change depending on how well off you were, what areas you were around, and what the season was. The word itself comes from a French word known as potage, which simply refers to anything made in a pot. This is actually a very prehistoric dish because it existed way before the medieval times ever occurred. It had roots in Celtic and Germanic traditions of pot-boiled grain-based food, and the Roman dish pulse was one of its earliest forms. Pottage, as such, has no set list of ingredients or rules to really adhere to. Adaptability is arguably the one trait this dish doubles down on the most. It's supposed to be something you can make with whatever is available to you, no matter how bare bones or abundant that is. While typically people do try to have an even balance of grains, legumes, foraged ingredients, and meat, there's no preference for any specific kind of grain or meat over the other. Bits of pork, intestines, brain, veal, chicken thighs, pinto beans, anything would work. It's also why this dish was able to exist in so many different cultures. Everyone could truly put their own spin on it. Hamburger hash is the unsung hero of the frugal kitchen. Born out of necessity and ingenuity, this dish has been rescuing leftovers and stretching budgets for decades. The concept is simple: ground beef, diced potatoes, and onions cooked together in a skillet. But its simplicity is exactly what makes it timeless. The origins of hash can be traced to the 17th century, when the term came from the French word hacher, meaning to chop. In America, it evolved into a practical way to repurpose leftover meats. By the 20th century, hamburger hash became a staple in many households, particularly during tough economic times, when every ingredient had to count. Potatoes were the perfect partner, cheap, filling, and versatile. Onions, meanwhile, brought a touch of sweetness to balance the savory beef. Some cooks added a sprinkle of paprika or a dash of Worcestershire sauce for an extra punch of flavor. While it may not have the glamour of a Sunday roast, hamburger hash had one major advantage. It came together fast, a blessing on busy weeknights. Hamburger hash proves that even leftovers can shine, especially if you fry them just right. It's a humble dish with a big heart, reminding us that great meals don't need complicated recipes. Rice with butter and soy sauce was one of those dinners that made the most out of almost nothing. After the war, a lot of homes had rice in the pantry and not much else. Grandma would boil a pot, fluff it with a fork, and then stir in a generous pat of butter and just enough soy sauce to give it color and salt. It was not traditional, it was not fancy, but it did the job. The butter gave it richness, the soy sauce gave it depth, and together they turned a plain grain into something worth sitting down for. You could eat it on its own or serve it beside scrambled eggs, canned vegetables, or the last spoonful of meat from the night before. It was a filler, yes, but a warm, flavorful one that somehow tasted better the more you needed it. This dish was quiet comfort, the kind that showed up when no one else did and still managed to make you feel full. And that is why it stayed in rotation, long after things got better. Sometimes the best meals were the ones that asked for the least. Mushroom and herb stew is a medieval dish that's pretty timeless. It's still something that a lot of people bring to vegan parties whenever they can. Today, mushrooms are pretty much a gourmet ingredient, but in the medieval period, they were regarded as wild food. It was pretty typical to spend your day foraging at the edge of fields for mushrooms, and laborers who worked in the woods or fields would rely on them all the time. Medieval people had an intuitive knowledge of a vast variety of mushrooms, especially the ones that were available locally. Field mushrooms, also an ancestor of modern-day button mushrooms, morels, chanterelles, and other kinds of wild types were all things they worked with. They were also pretty smart. While they didn't exactly know why certain mushrooms killed them, made them sick, or caused them to see things, they knew to avoid those and how to spot them out, and that's what let them have mushroom-based dishes as a part of their diet in the first place. Mushroom and herb stew was a seasonal dish that was prepared during the late summer to autumn seasons, because this is the time where mushrooms would be the most available. The herbs that people would use were typically marjoram, thyme, and parsley, and winter savory was also something people thought worked with the natural earthiness of mushrooms extremely well. Among peasants, this was a stew that was valued for its umami flavor, and it's something that they would make regularly. Break time, 1 second. Scalloped ham and potatoes, a classic dish that brings together two of the most beloved comfort foods, tender ham and creamy, cheesy potatoes. This casserole has been a staple at family gatherings and Sunday dinners for generations, proving that simple ingredients can create something extraordinary. The dish's origins can be traced back to the mid-19th century, where scalloped potatoes, sliced potatoes baked in a rich, creamy sauce, became a popular sign. The addition of ham likely came later, as cooks sought to stretch their budget by incorporating leftover meats. The result was a filling, satisfying dish that combined the savory goodness of ham with the comforting texture of potatoes. Scalloped ham and potatoes became even more popular in the 20th century when convenience foods like canned soups and processed cheese made their way into American kitchens. The creamy sauce, often made from a blend of milk, butter, and cheese, is what binds the layers of ham and potatoes, creating a hearty casserole that's easy to make but feels like a special meal. Scalloped ham and potatoes is the ultimate use-it-all dish, because who doesn't love a meal where everything gets smothered in cheese? It's a dish that's perfect for feeding a crowd and always leaves everyone asking for seconds. Oven-broiled ham and cheese on rye was Grandma's way of making fast food feel like real food. She would pull out slices of rye bread, sometimes fresh, sometimes a little dry, and line them up on a baking sheet. Deli ham came next, folded neatly or just torn straight from the package. Then she laid down thick slices of Swiss cheese, the kind that bubbled up when it melted and turned brown around the corners. Into the broiler it went for just a few minutes. You had to watch it close. Blink too long and it would burn. But when it was done just right, the cheese was molten, the rye was crisp, and the ham was warmed through with that perfect salty edge. The smell filled the whole kitchen. Kids came running. Adults stopped what they were doing. It was hot, fast, and easy to eat with your hands. Some people added a smear of mustard. Others topped it with a tomato slice or pickles. But most of the time, it needed nothing at all. It was simple food that felt like a treat, the kind of meal that made an ordinary evening feel a little more special. Which 1950s dinner brings back the warmest memories of your family's kitchen table? Drop it in the comments, hit like and subscribe so we can keep celebrating the homemade recipes that made post-war America feel like home.